Hi, welcome to Rate My Gadget. Are you having this issue where you're trying to bleed your radiator, a little bit of air comes out and then it stops? I'll show you how to fix it. So first things first, the reason that you are probably wanting to do this job is that in some radiators in your house, what you may find is that they're only getting hot from the bottom, and the reason for that is that you've got air at the top of them. Now in all radiators, in this case this is a long-standing radiator, you'll have an air bleed at the top, usually on the right hand side, but it can be either. And what you do is you put a key in, open it up, air comes out and the water pressure rises, comes in. Now there's some really good videos out there about how you can balance your radiators, and I'll show you. There's one from the DIY guy, but in essence what usually it means is that you'll have probably one radiator, if you're unlucky two, which do have a tendency, if there's any air that gets into the system, to start filling up from the top. Or you may have a new radiator that you've just put in and there's air in the system. Okay, now the reason that you may be having issues with the air is because simply you haven't got the pressure that the water is able to push the air out of the way. Now that can be due to several reasons. The most obvious reason is to check that your valves on the bottom of the radiator are opened up. Okay, so let me show you how. So you'll have on either side, these aren't thermostatic, these are just like a tap in which they just open up. Make sure that these are open, okay? Because if they're not, then you'll find that there is no way for the water to come into the radiator and come out. So in other words, you're just basically closing the radiator off from the loop. If you've not got this type, then you've probably got this type where you've got one valve like this on one side and then a thermostatic valve on the other side. Now, the easiest way to find out is if the valve is open is to fill the radiator when the heating's on. If it's hot, then you know that there's hot water getting into it. But what you may want to do is just open it up fully like this to try and see if the air will come out. On this side, what you'll normally find is you've got a cap which takes off. That is just basically a tap, and then you want to open that up fully. But like I said, if the radiator is getting hot, then that's probably not your problem. Now, the other reason that you may be having an issue is that this radiator, for me, is on the top floor. So if you imagine my boiler that's down on the ground floor has to push that water up 2 floors. Now, what that may mean, and in order to get the air out of the system effectively, is you may want to switch off all the radiators in the house with the exception of this one. What that means is you're not touching the boiler and increasing the pressure in the system. All you're doing is isolating all the other radiators so that this radiator basically gets all the full oomph of water coming into the system. So, second thing to try, if the valves are open on the bottom, is to close all the thermostatic valves, or all of the valves ideally on the left hand side, so that you isolate all the radiators, and then you try and see if you can get this draining by opening up the top air valve. Okay, ideally do that with the heating on. Doesn't really matter, but if you do it with the heating on, it might just get the pump going and it might increase the pressure. Third way of doing it, and unfortunately this is where you may need tools, and if you don't feel comfortable you may need to get someone in, is that the reason, and this is especially important if you've got an old radiator or an old house, is that you do get sludge buildup within the system. Now, unfortunately, if it's left for too long, that can give you issues with the boiler, but it can also mean that it will find its way into a radiator, especially if the radiator's not been used for a while. So if you've had a long summer, the radiator's been isolated, then you try and open it up, you might find that there's a lot of debris, rubbish at the bottom of the radiator. And what that means is it's blocking the valves. Now, you can get solutions out there that you can put into the system to try and break that down. The best thing to do, if you've got that option, is to try and drain the radiator at the bottom, and then you can get all the gunk and everything out of it. In some instances, you might be able to even, if you can, on the bottom of the valve itself, there might be a bit of a drain. So I'll show you that, and I'll show you what that could look like. So if you're fortunate, if you're unfortunate, in which you've got a lot of sludge build up in the bottom of your radiator, what you might find is you might have one of these that sits out the side of the valve. What that allows you to do is effectively drain the radiator without having to take the whole radiator off the wall. Now, what you can do is take this out, try and let some water out of it. And if you find that there's a load of black sludge or anything, then you know that that could be the problem. Okay, now if you do that, you may need to then fill up the system again with additional water, because obviously you've taken water out of the system. And that brings me on to my final proposed solution for how to get air out of a radiator. If you've tried to open up the valves at the bottom, if you've tried to close all the valves in the house apart from the radiator, and even if you've tried to clean the sludge out the bottom, but you're still unable to get the air out of the radiator, and therefore you've still got a system where it's only got water that's hot at the bottom, the problem you might be having, and this is the final potential option you've got before calling in a boiler engineer or a plumber, is to look at the pressure that you've got within the system. Now, put simply, and again, there's other videos out there which explain it a lot better than I can, but you have a system whereby it's at a pressure to push the water around. So it's a closed system. So you'll have a closed system, which in essence gets pushed around by the boiler through the pump, and it heats up all of the radiators. So it's very different from the hot water tap, which is obviously open. Now, that pressure in that system may be quite low, and if it is low, what you might be finding is that that radiator, because it's quite a distance from the boiler, or for whatever reason because the pipework is slightly different, it's not getting the full pressure to that radiator, and therefore it's not able to push it out. So let's see how you pressurize the boiler. The way that you pressurize the system is there'll be a pressure gauge that's at your boiler. So I'm going to show you for my boiler. However, please do seek advice elsewhere to find out what pressure your system should be at and how to do it on your specific make of boiler. The principle is the same with all of them, that basically you'll have a pressure gauge, which if it's low on pressure, then you might need to increase. So let me show you mine. So what you'll have, let me move that out of the way, and I'll take this off. Right, let me move that out of the way. What you'll have a pressure gauge there, and you can already see, if I zoom in, my pressure is actually quite low. I'm showing there that I'm under 1 bar, and actually I know through the installation of this system that it should be just shy of around about 2 bar. Okay, the mark at the top. So what that means is I need to basically put pressure into the system, and the way you do that is, and it will be different for different people, is you'll find that there'll be a loop that goes into the boiler. In my case, it's this pipe here, that when I turn this on, this will then pressurize the system. So if I do that, so if I turn that on, I'll just do it very slowly, like that. You'll find I'm only doing it ever so small. The pressure on that system goes up. You can see the needle is just getting to 1 bar now. Now what that means is, as I'm putting water into the system, it's pressurizing it, and it means it's got more chance of the air being pushed out. Okay, I'm going to stop that there so you can hear me. So it may not be sufficient. I've turned it off now, but I've got to 1 bar. So at the time when I was, trying to bleed air out of it, I was less than 1 bar. That's not really particularly high. So it might be that's the reason why. Okay. So in summary, if you need to get air out of the radiator and it's not working for you, make sure the valves at the bottom are open. If that doesn't work, close all the rest of the valves on all the other radiators that are in the system to see if that will help. If that doesn't work, then you might have some sludge in the system, but also you might want to check the pressure that's going into the system from your boiler, and if you need to, increase that. I really hope that's helped. Please do like, please subscribe, and thanks for watching. And just to close this video out, so for me, I've pressurized the system, going from 0.5 bar, and there you go, you can hear it's, yeah. Oh God, didn't want that. Okay, I need to clean that up. Thanks for watching. Please like, please subscribe.